when we can step into agency, understanding the capacity that we have to be able to shape and change our own behaviors and the way we relate to other people, the way we relate to ourselves as men. And from that, we'll look at what's possible on the other side of agency, which is growth, which is anything that we want to change, expand, heal, move towards, so that we're taking up a shape that we feel is appropriate for ourselves, the relationships around us, and this moment in history. So here we are in episode 7 of the first season of Questions Men Ask. We've been following a particular arc. We've been asking a series of questions to understand where we are as men, how we got to be here, what's possible instead. And in episode 7 and episode 8 as well that's coming, we're going to start asking the question, what can we do in response to the place that we find ourselves, the shapes that we find ourselves in as men, and the situation that we're in more widely, socially, what's the situation that we're in? So that's our season 1 inquiry, and we're nearing the end of it. Today's episode is really about what's mine to do, finding a role for me, what's mine to do as a man. And we're going to today be looking at that individual role that we have and looking at the 3 spaces we might move through, which are the phase of self-inquiry, where we're looking at trying to understand our own patterning, our own conditioning, the way we behave, the shape of man that we've assumed in our lives. From there, we're going to skip and look at what happens when we can step into agency, understanding the capacity that we have to be able to shape and change our own behaviors and the way we relate to other people, the way we relate to ourselves as men. And from that, we'll look at what's possible on the other side of agency, which is growth, which is anything that we want to change, expand, heal, move towards, so that we're taking up a shape that we feel is appropriate for ourselves, the relationships around us, and this moment in history. So where are we and what's mine to do? The questions for today. Jared, what have you got about self-inquiry?
All right. Well, self-inquiry tends to start with what I'll call a light bulb moment. There's always that moment where we either get some really generous critical feedback from somebody who cares about us, or maybe they don't care about us and they just call us a jerk. But either way, we get some clue of like, oh, I'm not showing up either the way I think I am or the way I want I am. Maybe it brings an unconscious behavior forward and brings it up into the conscious awareness. But there's always this
happen for you, Jared?
It did happen for me. Yeah. And so we'll be sharing our personal examples as we go through each of these stages to help illustrate. So for mine, I was leading a leadership program, and it was a program where I lead my section, and then we come together for these big weekends with all these other people from across our region that are leading their portions. And then we have the person who's leading the big weekend, and they give us feedback and they work with us and they teach us things. And my mentor, my teacher, gave me some feedback that I am like an island and like I'm Teflon. She's like, you're too put together. You're too perfect. You're too like pristine. And it gets in the way of people being able to connect with you. And it means that people won't feel safe to be vulnerable with you or to share things with you. They just think you're too put together, and it intimidates them.
Right.
And we all know that you're not that put together, like nobody is. So it's also inauthentic. And so that was my light bulb. It was like, oh, okay. Because I had thought that was a good thing. Like, present a really good face. Right. Really show up and look good and sound good and like have your stuff together. That had been my mode of leadership. It was like, yeah, look like you really got it going. When she shined that light on how I was showing up for the participants of this program I was leading, it helped bring some more things into the light that I had been frustrated by, but didn't know why. I noticed that participants didn't open up to me that much compared to other people that were leading. And I noticed that I would have participants leave the program before it ended. And that was another, like, it confused me of like, why are they leaving? Like, this is an awesome program. I'm crushing it. And I didn't have answers to that. And so that started my path. I was like, oh, okay, there's more going on here that I'm now can start to get my hands around. The self-inquiry moves us from a victim mentality or an unconscious actor into being a man that's in awareness, brings something more out of shadow into the light. And there's certain archetypes as well that we often unconsciously play in our lives, in our work, these shapes, or, we've talked about molds. And so some of these archetypes, and there's probably many, but here's kind of the core ones we came up with. An alpha. I'm an alpha man. I'm a beta man. I'm beta. Or like the good guy, the nice guy, like the really sweet, polite guy.
I think that I had a bit of training around that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if there was a light bulb, it was, and I think there have been several actually, but they were typically when me playing out that role, that archetype didn't have the impact I thought it would. Mm. So I was raised as a boy to be the good guy, to be polite, courteous, and it would be like a guy holding a door for a woman. It was that kind of thing. And I can distinctly remember a couple of times, and I spoke about one in an earlier episode, where my offer of what I thought was appropriate behavior, a man helping a woman, was roundly rejected by the woman involved, who thought it was patronizing and unnecessary. And I instantly had to recompute all sorts of things because my map of what was appropriate for me, the way I would behave as a man in a social situation, was invalidated immediately. And I'm back to the drawing board. So yeah, we get these particular shapes, and that's that they can be very constraining. Yeah,
absolutely. And also point out that, like, it's not bad or wrong to take on some of these shapes. Another one is the gentleman, which also really sounds like what you were reaching for in that moment, like who you saw yourself as and who you were trying to express and contribute. So it's not that the archetypes themselves are bad all of the time. It's that when we're unconscious with them, when we're not present with the situation or asking for consent or whatever it is, we're just being that archetype, being used by that archetype. It can sometimes get in the way. We don't notice things. We're not reading the situation because we're being used by it. The other archetype that's another fun one to throw in. There's the bad boy, the opposite of the nice guy, which I don't know that I've ever actually been the bad boy. I think I've maybe wished I was the bad boy in like high school and college when I noticed that they tend to get more attention from women. But yeah, otherwise haven't really stepped into that one. But some traits of how this might show up in our lives are things like rigidity, like just not being flexible or open to shifting or being in the flow, aggression, or dominance and really needing to like be in control of a situation. Also objectification, things like arrogance or superiority, like I know better, I am better than this other person that I'm interacting with. And then another one is emotional repression. And I had to look this up when we were prepping, John. Repression and suppression. I was like, what's the difference? Repression is when we suppress our emotions subconsciously. We're not aware that we're doing it. And there might also be emotional suppression, but I think for most of us, it's much more unconscious. I don't know how, I don't consciously have thoughts of like, oh, that feels bad. I don't want to feel that. It's more in the background. It's quiet and I don't notice it. It just happens. And that was definitely what was part of my like Teflon being an island thing that I was doing. Is I just noticed, like, if I was feeling something that was an authentic emotion in the moment, I would squash it and move it back and just present this really, like, what I thought palatable face that was like, oh, I'm a leader. I'm perfect. I've got it all together. Right. And so then the next question for us to ask. So
let me hop in if I can, Jared.
Yeah.
So those traits that you mentioned, rigidity, control, emotional suppression and repression, and our desire to be an arrogance or a superiority, those are traits which are functions or illustrators of an unhealthy masculine expression.
Yeah.
So if we're exhibiting those traits, we're likely trapped in a perhaps even toxic masculine shape.
Yes.
Where we assume that we can move through the world with rigid thought patterns that we impose on other people, that we can control situations. We looked at these traits as we were prepping for this episode, and I had to say that I recognize times when I've been affected by each of them. Mm-hmm. Has my behavior ever been aggressive? Well, I like to think not at a gross level, but in more subtle ways,
Yeah.
I for sure have to own up to that. I have to own up to times when I've wanted to dominate or control situations, and how that seems like a reflex. It seems like the right thing to do, and it's unlearning that reflex, which is the relevant action. Objectification. I remember more than once in men's groups asking the question, who here has not objectified a woman?
Mm.
And of course, no hands go up, because when we're honest with ourselves, we've been taught since we were boys to do that. I remember finding my 5-year-old nephew. I went to visit him. He lived in a different country, and I didn't see him very often. And I went to see him, and he was reading a comic, but it was an adult comic, and it had one of those. You know how somehow in old style comics, women are drawn in a particularly voluptuous way.
Yeah.
And here's this 5-year-old boy, and he holds the comic up, and he kisses the ass of whatever figure she was being represented on the page, and said to me, looked at me straight in the eye and said, "Look at the ass on that." Wow. This is from a 5-year-old boy. So we can only guess where he'd learned that from.
Right.
And we're so bombarded in these ways that objectification runs in almost every man, I'm sure. So these traits, are signs of an unhealthily expressed masculine energy.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so then on the emotional side, like which you could say is also the impact on us that we experience emotionally from portraying these traits. And so one, which is a big one, is what I call emotional monotone. And very much from my example of this, like being an island, being Teflon when I'm facilitating or leading something, is I cut off like the negative emotions, like, oh, I don't feel those. I can just everything rolls right off my back. No big deal. I don't have to call anything out. I don't have to be authentic with what's happening over here. And so what happens when we cut off the negative or the darker emotions is we also have to cut off the top, the upper, more beautiful, bright, light emotions, the joy, the beauty, the gratitude. And we just get into this kind of middle gray blah zone where there's not a lot of vividness. There's not a lot of highs or lows. And it's only when we can start to, which we'll get to later, when we can start to get back into like experiencing the full bandwidth of emotions that we can break out of that. But I bump into this in myself. Even though I've done a lot of work on it, I still see it. And I bump into it with a lot of men I work with that I see and know in my life of this. Just, John, I think you called it the "I'm fine." Like just like, how you doing? Oh, I'm fine. Yeah, it's good. Like, there's no like, oh, it's like life's amazing right now. Like all these incredible things. It's just, yeah, it's all right. I'm fine. It's good. And we don't get that depth and that texture of life and beyond that at all. And then some of the other ones are anxiety and that fear of the future and picturing, our imagination really getting, shot into what might happen. I just went and saw Inside Out 2, the Pixar film last night. Right. Which if you haven't seen it is phenomenal because it's such a great portrayal of our emotions and how they affect us and personifying them, giving them like a personality. And one of the main characters who's kind of the antagonist in the film is anxiety. And it's this huge learning curve for anxiety in the film. And so it's such a beautiful portrayal of how anxiety shows up in our lives, what it's trying to do, like anxiety having this really like beautiful intention. It wants to keep us safe, but that it can also often make things go haywire and really have deep impacts on us and the people around us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another one being depression, just, how that like deep beyond just having the blues, but like sadness, again, that impact of of being these ways, being objectifying, being controlling, being superior, cuts us off from connection, from relationship and intimacy with other people, with life. And it just narrows what's happening in our lives, what's possible, our sense of being connected to the world around us. And we get into this like which moves into the next one, which is like isolation and independence, what I call the lone wolf archetype, where it's like, oh, I got it. I see this all over the place in men, and I recognize it in myself as well. Just like the knee jerk when I'm presented with an opportunity or a project or something, where the intelligent thing to do would be to invite other people to play and to join and to support what this project is. This knee jerk of like, no, I know better than other people. I can do it better than them. I'll just do it myself. Like, it feels like that's the path of least resistance.
And where did those messages come to you from? I'm curious.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing comes to mind is like superhero movies. You know, you were talking about comic books, but even though like now there's, I never got into the Justice League or the I don't know what all, I wasn't a big comic book kid, but like the more team oriented comics or shows or movies, I was always like, it was Superman or Batman or Spider-Man, where they were much more on their own and they solved problems on their own. Right. And they didn't have a lot of support. Batman he had some support, you know, but mostly it was him out there in the suit doing the stuff. And similar to, like, you know, my dad was a carpenter who worked for himself. He didn't have, you know, he had subcontractors, but they were doing their work. He did his work. So it definitely is like it's a theme. It's an archetype that we see all around us. And we see it in all kinds of media around us. We see it in the personalities of the men that we're surrounded by a lot of the time.
Yeah. So, and these, so we're thinking of these as if we were looking at the behaviors of the unhealthily expressed masculine energy before, these are the symptoms that we might find inside somebody who's got those behaviors, inside a man who's trapped in an unhealthy expression. Yeah. We might end up with these symptoms of isolation and depression and numbness and so on. And I think you were going to talk about substance abuse as well, which is another outcome of being unable to express our energy in a free and uninhibited way. Yeah,
absolutely, and connects directly to, you know, one of those previous episodes we were talking about the state of men today and how prevalent substance abuse is, how impactful it is on men in our culture, and how outsized that is compared to women. And yeah, it's like that's how a lot of men, the box we find ourselves in when we feel these things and how uncomfortable they are, and that we often don't see the pathway to resolve these symptoms, to actually heal what is at the source of these. We choose to numb them, to escape them with substances.
Yeah. Yeah. A grand coping strategy.
Yep.
I don't mean grand as in one that we would recommend.
Right.
But
large.
But arising as a coping strategy for the difficulties of dealing with life straight on. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, as we find these symptoms, as we maybe recognize these traits in ourselves, we one of the other places to look that, John, you and I have really connected on in our work together, doing our own work but together in partnership, is to really explore our inner feminine, to get some contrast to what we're working with. I definitely in my own experience have noticed how monotone or shadowy or unclear it is when trying to explore my own masculine. And especially because we don't have a lot of great examples out there of these like incredibly grounded, beautiful, like just beaming masculine men. I'm kind of like tracking and picking and harvesting what I can, what makes sense. But I've actually found some of the best work I've done to illuminate my healthy masculine is to lean into what is my inner feminine expression.
Jared, let's just land this one, because we haven't talked about this in any depth yet in this series.
Yep.
what is the inner feminine? I'm hearing a question man ask, what is the inner feminine? You mean there's a feminine inside of me? Can you help me understand what you're saying at that level before we talk about the expression of that inner feminine?
Sure. Yeah, and it's such a good question, because that is a question I don't consciously remember asking that myself. I'm sure I did at some point, and I was like, wait a minute, but I'm a man. And it was at some point I realized that masculine doesn't equal man, feminine doesn't equal woman. In my earlier years, that was probably a bit of a revelation, but I still find that most of the time when I'm in conversation with people, they do collapse them. That masculine means man, feminine means woman. And that if you're a man, you only have and only should express masculine energy. And that to experience or to express or to align with feminine energy is somehow bad or wrong, or makes you less masculine or less of a man. And thankfully, since my childhood, a lot has shifted in our culture at large around that. There's a lot more acceptance of men expressing more feminine energy, women expressing more masculine energy, but there's still a lot of that collapse of like not understanding. But we all have both. Like we're all meant to have both and to feel both and to express both. You know, anytime you see a man being super sweet and cuddling a cute little baby and caring for that baby, like you're seeing that man in his feminine and expressing it so beautifully. And in those kind of situations, it feels more like acceptable or more comfortable for us. And there's a lot of ways we can express that, you know, and we can go deeper into Jung and his animus, that we all have this opposite of ourselves that is this guide to our unconscious, to our shadow selves, that we can be in relationship with as access to our own healing and like growth and awareness. The more I come to terms with and accept that I am a being that contains both masculine and feminine energy. And yes, I may feel more comfortable at one end of that spectrum. But it's not healthy to stay fixed at that one end of the spectrum. I think I've found the more I work with inner feminine, the more I realize that being dynamic and moving and dancing along that spectrum based on what kind of situation I'm in, what it calls for. You know, a perfect example that is like such a meme in our world is a female partner venting or sharing with their male partner about some issue they're dealing with their friends or their family or something like that. Oh, they're doing there, and the man just wants to fix it. The man's like, great, you came to me for advice. That must be why you're sharing this with me. So as we're sitting there, we're like, okay, how would I fix this situation? Like my masculine is really good at fixing things. So we're sitting there, we're listening. Okay. And then we just hit him right between the eyes. Here's what you should do. And then inevitably, many times in those situations, our female partner is like not happy. And gets upset, gets frustrated, yells at us, and we're confused. Like, why are you sharing this with me if you don't want me to fix it for you? And hopefully those of you listening have also figured out that it's really important to either ask at the beginning, like, why are you sharing this with me? Do you want me to help you solve it? Or do you just need someone to hear it and support you? Is a good place to start. But again, that's a place where shifting into our feminine and again, reading the situation, maybe asking a question or two before they get rolling and finding like, oh, what energy is really going to be appropriate here? What's going to serve this person I love so dearly that's clearly dealing with something? And it may be a more feminine, like listening and grounding and empathizing, letting that person know you really hear them, that what they're feeling is real and valid, whether you agree with it or not. So that's just one of those examples that we're all probably pretty familiar with. But coming back to the work we can do as men, I think this might be the number one thing I recommend for men.
The number one thing.
Number one, with a bullet,
number one.
is to do this work, to get curious about what does my feminine look like and feel like? What is this?
What would feminine energy feel like flowing through me?
Yes.
How would I act? How would I think? Yep. How would that be different?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I was giving that some thought. And
Yeah, and to build relationship with that energy in us. We're all pretty familiar with our masculine, but I feel like many of us have kind of shoved our feminine into a deep dark place far away.
so let's have some clues as to what that part of us might look like or feel like. Some of the things that you've already mentioned, it's men showing their capacity to act with softness, gentleness, to demonstrate caring for things other than themselves, people, or actually might even be the natural world, the world that we live in. So exhibiting those traits that are associated with women in our culture, but come naturally through us as an expression of our own feminine energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Things like appreciating and creating beauty in the world.
Yes.
Things like fostering and contributing to community, to friendships, to family, like caring and tending to the social aspects of our lives. Like there's infinite, when we were prepping this, we're like, man, we could do a whole season on this, this work, but here's a little snippet and probably more to come on this, but it's so important. The other one is for me is like feeling comfortable in my body and moving my body, being seen in my body, expressing beauty. Like dance has been a huge opening for me to work with and explore and learn how to like let her energy move through me.
Right.
And it's immeasurable, the difference that makes for me.
Yeah. And so the takeaway from that is that there is feminine energy in all of us. And firstly, that's okay. That's natural, that's normal.
Yep.
That we as boys and then men have almost certainly been involved in some way in trying to suppress it.
Absolutely.
I remember sharing the story in an earlier podcast about discovering the noise that my thighs made as they rubbed together while I was wearing corduroy trousers and having this terrible fear that was somehow made me not fully a man.
Yeah.
I think at that age, 9 or 10 years old, I probably went to the conclusion that makes me gay, which means I'm not a man. A whole string of false premises there put together in a very unhealthy paradigm. And what I've been able to do is disassemble that over the years. But the fear of our own inner feminine being expressed. Yep. So we have it, we've been suppressing it. And then you're pointing us to a place where actually let's own it. Let's go look. Let's get curious.
Yeah.
What is it like if I decide that I want to move or dance in a particular way? If I want to appreciate beauty or look beautiful? Yeah, all of those are really interesting points of inquiry. And as you say, we could do a whole episode or an entire season.
Yeah, there's so much this. There. Yeah. So much. And what a powerful way to be self-inquiring, to learn more about ourselves, to expand our understanding of who we are, what is contained in what we consider us, and can shed a lot of light on things.
Yeah.
And then there's some things you can do, like actual actions you can take beyond just this kind of like, whatever you're doing to do this self-inquiry that we've been describing so far, which might be journaling or meditating or like going on a walk and thinking about some things. There's some other things we can do that are which I'm going to name, which I just named a couple of bullet points, but some action items. So one is one I picked up in a course a while back that I love and I now use with clients, which is like do an interview. Set up. The exercise, the way I teach it is like pick 5 people in your life. And ideally pick 5 people that know you in different ways. So someone from work, someone from your family, someone from your friend group, someone from your golfing buddies, whatever it is. Pick 5 men that know you in different aspects of your life and ask, and maybe it's men or women. It doesn't just need to be men, and ask them, like pick 5 questions that are like deep inquiring questions about how I as a man show up in that sphere, in that community with them. And so one of the best questions I love was, if you're hanging out with our friends or family as part of that community and I'm not there, but I come up, like someone mentions me, what's the conversation? What do people say about me when I'm not there? Which can be an incredibly confronting question to ask. And you definitely need to prepare whoever it is that's going to be answering that you really do want the honest truth. That's why you're asking. Please don't sugarcoat. But you also have to do some work on yourself to be prepared for that kind of honesty. And to be able to take that graciously so that it feels safe for this person to share that kind of authenticity with you.
Yeah.
But that has been an incredible exercise for myself and people I work with to find those blind spots, to find how are people listening to me and viewing me outside of what me inside of my own head is experiencing.
I've often reflected that I think it's the perspective of women that I value most in those for real revelation, to see something that I can't see on my own, because I'm looking at the world through predominantly male filters.
Yeah.
And when you go and ask women ask those questions, my impact, what does it feel like when I'm around? What is the way I influence a situation?
Mm-hmm.
What I'm more likely to hear back is something that's about how my presence affects the safety and comfort of other people.
Mm.
In my experience, men are less tuned to those issues.
Yeah.
We typically are resilient despite the circumstances we find ourselves in. We'll make it okay.
Right.
There's a whole different register for women in the world, which is about their personal safety.
Yeah.
And this is a huge takeaway in my own learning, that women have to orient between safe spaces in their lives.
Yeah.
And safe spaces means places where they don't feel there's a threat from men. Not necessarily a threat of physical violence, though all too often that is the case, but a threat that they won't be fully accepted and seen and honored for their own perspective in a situation.
Yeah. So the next step, which I just mentioned, is doing some self-reflection. If you're a journaler, which I highly recommend doing some journaling, to just get your thoughts out of your own head and put it down on paper, put it in a place where you can then look at it in a more objective way. I also, with clients, some people it doesn't work for them to handwrite in a journal. Sometimes I tell people to type. The other one that I love is, now everyone's got a phone that has a little audio recorder app as part of it. And I kind of use a bunch of different ways of journaling, but I love doing audio recordings, especially if I'm out on a walk or something like that. I'll just drop some thoughts in there, just hit record and just dump what's in my mind. Another one is a video recording, which I'll do for specific situations. Especially if the first time I ever did it was after my vision quest, and having the visual of myself a day after coming back from my vision quest, sharing about the experience, not just hearing myself, but also seeing myself, incredibly valuable to go back and revisit that. So I use that for bigger, more transformational moments. But any way you can do that, any way you can just empty your mind into some other format that you can then review. So supportive for that self-reflection, literally like looking at ourselves in a mirror and what's going on in us.
So all of these means of self-reflection that you've just taken us through, Jared, they are ways in which we can come into awareness rather than be operating unconsciously.
Exactly.
Ways in which we can come to see that we have, the conclusion is that we can have agency over what was previously unchangeable in our lives because it was unconscious. So when I'm operating unconsciously, I don't even recognize the pattern of behavior, let alone have the capacity to change it. But once we start to look in these different ways, we start to inquire into the shape that we've taken on as a man, the mold I was poured into that consisted of, yes, my father and grandfather's brother, the teachers around me, that whole environment, the culture I was born in. When I understand that shape and start to see how it's affecting me and how it's affecting other people, I can step into this next stage that we wanted to talk about, which is agency.
Yeah.
Agency being the capacity and willingness to take action to make a change. And I still distinctly remember the period in my mid-20s when I realized that I had agency over my own life in a way that I hadn't previously thought about. Training programs that I was sent on as a young graduate were eye-opening. There are choices. I can put my hands on the levers that affect the choices I make and the behavior that I produce. And so what we're encouraging in this conversation is for us as men to step into agency, to accept that we have agency. And we can talk about that as a responsibility, an ability to respond to a particular situation.
Yeah.
And so the message is we have that capacity. How do we foster that capacity? How do we really land it in ourselves? And the couple of points that we had that we wanted to make about that is really to understand, to begin to understand that we have that capacity. But then I loved it when you said off camera, you said, well, what we're really trying to do here is find a why, a motivation that allows us to channel that agency.
Exactly.
Because if I don't have a why, I've got agency, but I'm doing nothing with it. So it was about finding a why. Why would I want to change the shape? Why would I want to break out of the mold that I was poured into? So often the cause for that is because of the impact of our unconscious behavior.
Yep.
And so in your wake-up call, as you described earlier, your unconscious behavior had you feel you were doing a great buttoned-up job,
Yep.
but it made you unapproachable to people.
Yep.
That was sufficient to cause you to have to start rethinking some things because it wasn't producing the results that you wanted. It's having the opposite effect to the effect that you were trying to transmit to people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the question we might ask ourselves, all of us listening, is what's the cost and the impact that I've had in the behaviors that I engaged in the shape that I grew into.
Exactly.
What's the way in which my behaviors touched other people? That's a very chastening process.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've had to look at inside my own marriage. I've had to look at and account for and own up to ways in which my behavior has caused harm, has caused upset, has caused suffering, has caused pain to Sand.
Yeah.
And there've been more than enough times when that's been the case. Almost all of them, I like to think, out of unconscious patterns that have arisen. But it's not only unconscious. There have been times when I've engaged in behaviors that have made me feel good at her expense.
Yeah.
To put a wrapper around it. And she's been honest enough to tell me about the impact, what that means, what that's cost, how that's hurt her. And then we have a situation in which there's enough information there for me to have a why.
Yeah.
Why would I be engaging in any behavior that was to the detriment or that was causing suffering to the woman I love more than anybody else in the world?
Yeah.
So finding a why out of the impact or finding a why out of what's possible if I were to operate in a different way.
Totally.
If my creativity's been stifled because I've been rigid in my thinking and prepared only to use a few different strategies in order to solve a problem or make a success of something, then is there a way, does there become a way in which I can want to acquire some different traits? Can I free up my creativity? Can I free up my curiosity? Can I free up my capacity to care or to show other people that I care?
Yeah.
And so we're finding a why out of what doesn't work and what we want to have in our lives instead. I don't know if there's any of that resonates with particular motivations that you've had in your own inquiry and stepping into agency, Jared.
Yeah. I mean, from that example I've been using, I love how you created impact and you named it. I just want to underline, like, it's both the impact on me and the impact on others. And often it's starting to actually increase our sensitivity when we have that light bulb to like, oh, I'm having this impact I don't want to be having on this other person that I care about or I'm committed to. In my experience, or in my example, it was these participants in my course that I cared so much about. It was a 7-month-long program. I was given every ounce of energy I had to support them in moving through this curriculum and becoming what they saw possible when they registered. And so to get that experience of like, oh, this is why people are dropping out of the program. This is why they don't come to me when they're having problems. This is why I find out they're going to other people that maybe can't support them as well as I can, because they just don't feel like I'm like I'll understand them or like I can hold them in that. And then I notice the impact on me. Then that makes me feel really sad, makes me frustrated with myself that I haven't seen this sooner, didn't put it together, all of these things. So impact is so medicinal. And again, it's another one of those things I think we're taught in our modern Western culture to just push aside, move on through. But there's beauty, there's so much medicine in that to get that. And then like what you said of like seeing what's possible. So for me in that example, like I saw what was possible. It was like, oh, I could actually be way more effective here. I could contribute way more fully here if I can learn to be more approachable, to let down that veneer of I've got it all together and be more authentic, be more real with people and communicate my humanity. Like, yeah, I'm a human man who is fallible, makes mistakes, has my own anxieties, gets depressed and sad about things. And I can be real about that because I know you're experiencing those things too. And I, as a leader, I can demonstrate that I can have those things and I can work with those and I can move through them to also show you that there's also a way through, that there's a way to really strongly ground and hold our humanity without having it take us out.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Which puts me in mind of the need for and the value of a vision of your future self.
Exactly.
So if we've come to this moment of realization, we had the light bulb moment, which triggered some self-inquiry, and we've come to recognize that we've got agency. What we need then is a vision of how we would like to be, the shape I would rather flow into, the shapes I want to have. How can I show up differently from the ways that I have? And so the importance of a vision there is really high. And just to sort of complete this conversation about agency, we were thinking about the 3 questions that frame the movement through agency. Could you do something different? Would you do something different? Will you do something different?
Yeah.
Could you do something different about, do you have the capacity to? And waking up into agencies, yes. Well, of course I do. Now I understand that I can unhook some of these patterns. So I could. Would I? Well, let's think. That would I takes us through the conditions that might need to be in place or that have been in place and prevented us from making a change. Would I, if it were possible, would I actually want to do that?
Right.
And we realize that we have the desire there. And the 3rd question, will you? Could you, would you, will you? Alrighty. Will is the point where we start to turn all of that thought and energy into action. And so we get to the point of action. Or as we said earlier, we go through inquiry and agency into growth. So growth is the phase where action happens. We wanted to talk about what are the growth options that become available to us after inquiry, after we've stepped into agency.
Yeah. Yeah. Once we answer yes to the question, will I?
Yes.
Now what? Mm-hmm. And the first step, again, using these masculine gifts we have, is strategy, is vision. As you said in that agency section, we're beginning to get this vision, this possibility of this is who I can be as I work with this, as I heal, as I grow my consciousness, as I clean up my impact. What's possible? Who can I be, and why do I want to become this person? And then there's, okay, how do I get there? What are the steps? What's my action plan? And so creating a strategy, creating a plan, calling in support to have that effective strategy. And another really strong one is, we mentioned the archetype of the lone wolf in the earlier section of self-inquiry, is to shift out of that, is to ask for support, have accountability structures, share your plan, and specifically share your plan with other men. Build, if you don't already have other men in your life where you have some ability to hold each other to account, to share with each other, hey, here's what I'm up to, here's what I'm working on, this is what is important to me right now, and to call each other out when you see each other falling behind or slacking off or getting distracted, of just lovingly having someone say, hey, you shared with me this beautiful possibility of this man you're becoming and your plan to get there. And I'm not feeling it right now. I haven't seen any action around you. It feels like you've lost your way a little bit. What a beautiful gift that is, to have community of men to do that for us. The women in our life can do that for us as well. But again, that is a really strong masculine gift, and having that sense of male camaraderie and accountability is so important.
And you've had real experience of that, Jared, and so have I, in men's groups that I've sat in.
Yeah.
Where we hold each other to, yes, the ideal, the vision that we have created and shared of how we'd like to be. We help each other with the personal work of overcoming old ingrained habits. We hold each other to account for taking actions that we've chosen to take, which will move us in the direction of growth.
Yeah.
And so to anybody that's listening, if you haven't experienced being in a men's group, we highly recommend that you find and a fairly simple search online will, I guess, produce some either in-person men's groups in the area where you live, or virtual opportunities, which have proliferated since the pandemic. Lots of men's work happening online now.
Yeah. And then the next step is continue to increase your awareness, like intentionally increase your awareness. The light bulb is great. Getting a reflection that kind of opens our eyes to something we've been unconscious to is great, very helpful. And now that we've said, yes, I will change this, I will develop myself, I will move towards this possibility that I'm committed to. That's a huge part of it, is we've got to continue to expand our awareness, shine more light on these shadowy parts of our masculinity, our maleness. And so some of the ways we do that is we keep learning, we study, we find some books, we watch YouTube videos, we find documentaries, things like joining a men's group, and get these incredible mirrors that are pointed at us when we share and we get this reflection back. The other is build deeper relationships with women where they really feel safe enough to be honest with us and to give us their perspective, and how, and recognizing the value of how different and valuable that is than the men in our lives, or the perspective that we carry and that we see ourselves in.
Yeah. So what you're saying, Jared, is that this isn't a one and done conversation. It's an ongoing process.
Absolutely.
It's an ongoing inquiry.
Absolutely.
And we ready ourselves for that continuing process of growth, and the continuing cycle through more self-reflection. What else can I see? Remembering our agency, and then back into growth and action.
Absolutely. I mean, this example I've been sharing of this, noticing this thing in this program I was leading, I mean, that was over 10 years ago that came to light. And I've never stopped continuing to expand my awareness around how I show up for and impact the people in programs I'm leading, clients I'm working with, and beyond, family members, all kinds of things. And getting really good at noticing when I go into that like veneer mode of looking super put together and just projecting this image of I've got it all I've got it all handled. And so constantly taking that in, consistently asking questions of people I'm facilitating programs with, or checking in with clients, or, checking in with my wife. I'll record client sessions. I do a lot of my work on Zoom, so I can record the sessions and I'll go back and watch. Maybe I'll even have my wife watch it with me and point, oh yeah, I noticed something right here. So it's a never ending journey and adventure of, like, okay, that was a proclivity. That was something I learned, I got trained in early on, and I saw it got in the way. So here's all this work I'm doing to keep working with it.
Yeah.
The other one we named in here, which is near and dear to both our hearts, is doing some medicine work. It doesn't just have to be, altering consciousness with medicine. It could be something like a vision quest, which I mentioned. There's a number of ways that we can do this, but these bigger ceremonies where we really step into a container to do some deep exploratory work, to release old patterns and stories and letting go of things, and make space for this new possibility, this new image we see of ourselves on the other side of working through what this is. And again, it's never over, but like that big initial chunk of work and old stuff that needs to be dropped and let go of, and the space that makes available, that then gives us that momentum to keep working with it.
Yeah, I've had some really tremendous teachings in medicine journeys that I've taken myself, and particularly with the medicine of psilocybin magic mushrooms. And I would go into journeys. I've done this, I don't know how many times, a dozen times at least. I go into a journey like that with a prayer and intention, and the prayer might be to understand better how I am meeting the world as a man. What is it that I can be shown? What can be revealed to me about the limitations or the opportunities of that? And profound teachings have flowed to me. On all, many occasions. And that, I think of that as having access to a source of ideas, information, wisdom, which is outside that which I see in the popular discourse. The gift of medicine work, when it can take us out of this reality, this set of norms, this set of ideas, and allow us to look at ourselves, look at our relationship to others, our relationship to the natural world, the cosmic order. Look at all of those things. And that is certain to illuminate perspectives that haven't come to us before. So medicine work can be a really valuable way of getting insight about ourselves and getting insight about for me, it's been getting insight into the patterns that play out amongst men generally that have got me caught or have got other people caught. And that gives me that perspective, brings me back into agency. It shows me other places where I have the capacity to affect change.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What a beautiful practice. And then the next is actual, like, the steps we take to alter the behavior. So we've done this work to really expand our awareness, to shine the light on all these dark nooks and crannies around whatever this area is. And then there's like, all right, here's where we're actually putting rubber to the road. We're getting to work. So one is building practices. Have things you do on a regular basis that keep you moving towards this possibility, this vision you have of what you want to achieve. Another is attend embodied workshops, like just be embodied. But a great way to do that is go to trainings, go to we have men's work on here, but it could be dance, go, do anything. For me, like, again, mine was a lot around facilitating and leading. So for me, it was bringing that new awareness I had to every time I'm leading, every time I'm in a training where I'm being coached and worked with around my facilitation, around how I work with people, how I coach people, continuing to get that mirror, that reflection of how I'm showing up and sharing in those, before I'm stepping up to the front of the room to share, to facilitate, sharing my intention. Hey, this is what I'm at work on. I'm actually empowering my coach to be looking for this thread that I'm tracking. and letting them know, hey, I've got this vision, I've got this possibility that I'm working towards in my facilitation and coaching, and I need your support. I want you to watch for this and help me continue to see where it's still showing up, and also acknowledge and reflect where it's not showing up, where I am really starting to shine through with beautiful authenticity and being really approachable and human and real, but doing it in a grounded way that is giving a good example. And yeah, I mean, there's
so embodied there is, when you say embodied, what you're pointing to is making this more than just a conversation we're having with ourselves in our own thinking.
Exactly.
It's actually turning those thoughts into choices that are acted out in the body.
Yep.
Different ways of, and you use the example of dance, where there's the capacity to move our bodies in new and different ways that aren't consistent with the rigid shapes that we might have been poured into.
Yep.
I mean, men have prescribed ways of dancing. And when we're, particularly, I mean, if we think back to the nightclub as the place where you might meet women, then what was happening? What was happening is that women were dancing typically, and men were stood around the edge of the nightclub looking at the women dancing. And the guy who went out and danced was an outlier in terms of the behavior of most men.
Absolutely.
Bringing different ways of thinking into our bodies, is a crucial step, because we won't shift stuff simply by thinking new thoughts.
Yeah, especially for men. Men are men and women are very embodied, but for men, I find that continues to be one of the biggest learnings for me as I stepped into working with men, and continues to inform me, is men are very in our bodies. And when we work on things and we work with things in our bodies versus in our minds and talking, it goes a lot better. Things flow a lot easier. We can grasp stuff. We can grok, one of my favorite words. We can grok it because we can feel it in our body. We can connect with it there, which often we could talk for hours and hours and hours and not get nearly as far as 10 minutes of dancing or wrestling or stepping up to a podium and giving a talk or whatever it is,
or shouting or yelling or waving or shaking.
Exactly. Like get energy moving, get out of our head, get into our bodies. So underlining that, especially for men in this kind of work. And then the final one that we have here for behavior change is therapy and or coaching, working with a professional who is trained, experienced, and skilled in guiding us through these journeys, through these hero's journey of our self realization, and knows the pitfalls, knows how to guide us around and through those, knows where it starts to learn us and understand how we can trip our own selves up, where we have these patterns, start reflecting those to us and keeping us on the path. Often as I became a coach and was getting into that, and I was looking for myself, like, who am I as a coach for my client? Like, why are they working with me? What do I make possible? And it's really that, especially as a coach, they can do this work on their own. My work as a coach is to the time between when they begin and when they arrive where they want to gets a lot shorter and straighter. When we tend to do it on our own or try to do it on our own, it's a much curvier journey and it tends to take a lot longer. And therapy is a whole other world of uncovering stuff that we didn't know was there, but is affecting our every moment, every breath, every word, every action.
If we have the agency and the will to take action, to grow in some way, in ways that move us towards a vision we have for our future selves, everything's possible.
It is.
Everything's possible. There are all manner of means available to us.
Yeah.
So I've really enjoyed this conversation, Jared. We've gone from the earlier episodes in this season showing us that we have a crisis on our hands. Mm-hmm. And we've come to this question today of what's mine to do? How can I respond? How can I act in this set of circumstances? And we've got 3 stages to attend to. once the light bulb, I love this idea of the light bulb, once something has initiated our curiosity, once we've had that experience of what I thought would work doesn't, or what I did had an unintended impact, and we're thrown into looking at ourselves, the shapes we've assumed as men. So once the light bulb's gone off, the 3 stages of inquiry, agency, and growth.
Yeah.
An inquiry, you gave us a plethora of ways of looking in at ourselves. And in the show notes for this episode, we've got a questionnaire. You can go to the show notes and you can find the questionnaire there. It's an exploration of how healthy is the expression of masculinity through you. Yep. I think there are 15 or 20 questions there. It won't take long. It'll give you some insight into where you, the listener, are in terms of the expression of healthy masculine energy. So that's there. So we've got the phase of you say inquiry, I say inquiry. Sometimes I say inquiry. I'm curious. I'm inquiring into what this realm is. We're uncovering more information about ourselves, the patterns we've got, the symptoms that might flow out of our patterns, and that aspect called the inner feminine.
Yeah.
And then we've got the moment of agency arrives, and we ask ourselves, could we, would we, will we take action in a different way?
Yeah.
Have we got a vision of our future selves? And then you've just taken us again through the options that exist once we decide we aren't committed to movement. Once we get that moment of I will, then there are a whole range of options available to us. So brothers listening, that's the message. Mm-hmm. We can find more information about the shape we've been poured into, the impact that's having on other people's lives, and then we can discover that we have agency. We have agency, whether we've discovered it or not. We do actually have agency.
Yep.
And in all sorts of ways, including in the brotherhood of other men who are committed to their own growth.
Yeah.
We have a host of ways of effecting change.
Yep.
Breaking the mold. You know, we love that idea that we're breaking out of a mold that's had us trapped in particular limiting ways. So we're breaking the mold. We're finding a different shape that we want to flow into. And the message that we're conveying today is that's so possible. Jared and I are treading our own version of that path. It's a path we continue to walk down. We've said that in the episode. It's not a single shot. There's not an easy destination. And once you've arrived, you can kick back, put your feet up.
Yep.
It's a path of continuing awareness, continuing inquiry, and continuing to use our agency in growth. Join the other men around you in a commitment to throw off the old and the unworkable and the limiting, and find new possibilities that serve you in your life, that serve the people that you love, and serve all that you care for, which I guess when we get down to it, extends out to this beautiful planet that supports us.
Yeah.
We're going to talk more about that in episode 8. But that's it. So Jared, we've often tried to wrap up these long and wonderful conversations in a nutshell. I wonder if you've got this week's episode in a nutshell.
Yeah, I mean, you were starting to get there. I'll just underline it a little bit more. Like, you can do this. Like, you listening to this, if this is a new conversation for you, you can do this. Men are doing this all the time. And there is so much support out there. There are so many people rooting for you to expand your awareness, to get the resources you need, and to make a change, to move towards that vision of yourself that you are inspired by. It is happening all around you. And as you go, resources will show up. So you can do it. You got this. And if you need anything, let us know, and we'll do what we can to support you on that journey.
So yes, we're here to support, and thank you for listening today. What we'd like to do is point you to the show notes where you'll find the questionnaire we talked about. You'll find some other resources. You'll find out more about the services that Jared offers and ways I'm supporting men in the world as well. You will also find details of the monthly drop-in that we have. It's an open and free of charge Zoom session. Jared and I will be hosting those ongoingly as a place where you can come and actually build community. You've been listening. That's a one-way process, but when you come to drop-in, it's a two-way process, and we get into conversations there, deep and rich conversations. So join us in the drop-in, please. Continue to send in your questions. We love to be informed by the questions that you have that both come into, but also are sparked by the conversations that we're having here on the podcast. So keep sending in your questions, please. And please help us to spread this podcast far and wide. If you know a man who's coming to recognize that he's stuck in a mold, that he's limited in his life, that something's not working, he wants something different, please put him onto the show, help him see where he can join this conversation. And lastly, please subscribe to the podcast wherever you found it.